Welcome to the MTA International Studios in USA, Silver Springs, Maryland. You're here at OpenForum. Today we discuss Islam, universal human rights, and the Cairo Declaration. We have two great guests with us here today. First is, to my right, Amir Shakur Malik. Amir is a practicing neurosurgeon in Houston, Texas, and a human rights advocate there as well. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Next we have Amjad Mahmood Khan, who's a practicing lawyer and adjunct professor at University of California, Los Angeles, and the National Director of Public Affairs for the Ahmadi Muslim community. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So we're talking universal human rights. We're talking there's a Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There's this Cairo Declaration. Make sense of it for us. What are these things and why do they matter?
Well, in the 20th century, the international community, the whole world agreed that after World War II, there would be a need to correct injustices. And that affirmation came in the form of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's not a treaty, it's just an affirmation, you can say a covenant, and it's an aspirational document in 1948. And it was signed by many, over 190 countries had affirmed this eventually, but only a handful of Muslim countries. And that set the framework for fundamental rights, which includes...
Why didn't all Muslim countries sign that on the spot?
Because I think there were a few provisions that pertain to freedom of religion, and particularly the freedom to change one's faith, to leave Islam and go into, for example, into Christianity. And Saudi Arabia particularly was against concretizing that right in 1948. Afghanistan and Pakistan, they did affirm the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but the Muslim world felt like it was a Western document.
But wasn't the Universal Declaration of Human Rights like the highest bar of freedom, justice, and equality? I mean, didn't it achieve the higher bar than any other document before that?
I think so. I mean, I think there's some argument. You can say the Magna Carta and other, documents in history were derived and drawn upon for this document. But yes, it has become the most important affirmation of universal human rights. But at the time, as you can imagine, the United Nations was just created. It was a fledgling mandate, and the Muslim world said, well, this seems like more of like a Western. They're very suspicious of Western countries constructing those rights.
So now fast forward to 1990, what happens?
So the Islamic world felt like they do believe in human rights, and the 56 Muslim majority nations said, we as an Islamic world should have our own affirmation. They called it, in Cairo, the Cairo Declaration on Universal Human Rights in Islam, or what has been referred to as the Universal Islamic Declaration of Human Rights. It was a robust document. It provided protections and for religious freedom and other important rights, but it didn't go as far as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and actually have specific problems and tensions that contradict even the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. One example, there's many, but one to choose from is this ability to change your faith. The Cairo Declaration says you shouldn't put pressure on people to change their faith. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which then was formalized in a treaty, the ICCPR, says in Article 18, 19, 20, and 27 that you absolutely have the fundamental right to change your faith without punishment.
But Amir, isn't that close enough? I mean, they achieve close purposes. What's the omission here by the Cairo Declaration that was achieved by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? I mean, they had the document. It was created in 1948.
I think what Amjad mentioned is very clear to somebody who is a lawyer, an advocate, somebody who understands law. But to a layperson, somebody like you and me, people who practice religion on a day-to-day basis, how does this apply to us? So if I were to think, how did this apply to me when I was in Pakistan, right?
You were born in Pakistan.
I was born in Pakistan. I'm a naturalized citizen in the U.S. Being there was still a Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I considered myself a Muslim, but a government or a constitution takes it upon itself to declare me something other than what I consider myself. So
you considered yourself a Muslim. Your government, I believe it was in 1974, said you are not a Muslim.
1974, there is an amendment to the constitution of that country that declares me a non-Muslim. So I'm thinking, okay, there's a Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
That says
that says that I have the absolute ability to declare my own faith as I deem fit, which I consider to be in accordance with my religion, which is Islam, and here I am following a little different form of Islam within a country that calls itself Muslim, but now I'm in contradiction because the constitution of that country all of a sudden declares me as non-Muslim. So I see, a big dichotomy or contradiction from what the universal human right suggests, which I believe to be, a perfect Islamic document, but the way it's practiced in certain Muslim countries.
So make sense of this. So now it's a fairly this Cairo Declaration is a fairly contemporary document. They were able to access the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was in 1948. This is 1990 now, so it's not too long ago by its very nature. And they left out key provisions, whereas Amir, in a country like Pakistan, a large country, can be declared a non-Muslim, and this document doesn't say anything about that?
It doesn't. The Universal Islamic Declaration of Human Rights is basically, that's the Cairo Declaration. It's basically an affirmation that there are certain fundamental principles that are quintessentially Islamic. It actually states that Islam is a perfect faith, it's guided by Islam, and that in core Quranic teachings there are certain rights that are protected. And it does say freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, and so forth. What it doesn't do is it doesn't address how the government should not have the capacity to engage in the analysis of who is or is not a Muslim, what's called in Arabic takfir, an ability to judge another person as Muslim or not. It doesn't engage in the polemical debates within Islam. Islam is a very diverse religion. There's Shias, there's Sunnis, there's 73 different kinds of Muslims. So it doesn't address the intra-Muslim relations that existed. It was
what was the purpose of the document?
To show the Western world that Islam is a united front. This was peddled by the Organization of Islamic Conference at the time. It's called Islamic Cooperation, the OIC, the largest umbrella Muslim organization in the world. And they said, look, we want to, as a bloc, say we believe in human rights. Because for so long, the Islamic world was accused of not believing in human rights. So it was, you can say, an imperfect attempt to try to bring themselves to comport with universal standards.
So, Amir, this doesn't, the intent of the document doesn't seem like it was achieved. How many countries were signed off on this?
A little over 50 countries.
So over 50 countries that are so-called with a majority of Muslim population in their country signed off on this. Did it achieve anything?
So let me give you an example. I think that's a great question. If we as Muslims believe everything in the Universal Declaration of Independence is part of the Islamic faith, there really is no reason to have another document.
Interesting. Are there any groups within Islam that actually believe in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as it is?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. And we belong to the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, and we absolutely believe that the Declaration of Human Rights is completely 100% in accord with Islam.
And that's not a qualified, whereas, leave out this clause, Muslims are more important than non-Muslims. There's none, the anti-Muslim community doesn't qualify it in any way?
No, it's absolute. So
why not? I mean, wouldn't Muslims want to have their own document where they believe this?
Because the idea of rights is grounded in nature. It's grounded in God's law. It's not grounded in one particular faith's tradition. These are rights for all people. So to say something's universal and then simultaneously to say it's Islamic is an oxymoron, is a contradiction. There's a tension there. Islam is universal, so the affirmation needs to be beyond Muslims. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which a few Muslim countries signed, the intent behind it was to say these principles are in the Quran, these principles are in the Bible, these principles are even in non-revealed texts. These are principles that are inherent in nature, that God has given, and these are basic minimum safeguards that every person in the world needs to follow. The moment the Islamic world, 42 years later, said, well, we believe that's okay, but we have a kind of a relative conception of that, it compartmentalizes the us versus them, and now rights are relative.
But just to defend the Cairo Declaration, I mean, everything it says, the words that it has inside the document are acceptable to most individuals, correct?
Yeah, I think by and large that's true.
But you're saying they just left out so many things. It was like the lowest common denominator they picked. You know, humans are important, if you will, and they left out all these other things, and that's why it's such an imperfect document. Is that the argument?
By omitting key issues and key rights, they're admitting the ability to discriminate on the basis of those rights. I'll give you an example. Apostasy, the changing of one's faith. See, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has no teeth. It has teeth through the ICCPR, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. That's what actually is a treaty, and that's enforceable in court. So Muslim countries, not all of them have signed that. The Universal Islamic Declaration of Human Rights says we're not going to touch the issue of apostasy because in Saudi, in Pakistan, this idea of apostasy can be punished under law. So they want to safeguard the status quo.
What is apostasy? There's actual countries where they practice this? There's a punishment for it?
You would think that today in the 20th century something like this would be probably primitive. But unfortunately in certain places like Pakistan, this still exists.
What does this mean? I mean, tell me a real life.
So, if you say, for instance, if you are a Muslim in Pakistan and all of a sudden today decide that you really like the Christian faith, you think that what Christianity stands for, those people are very nice and very gentle and they're doing good things around the world, and you want to change your faith, and you want to change from Islam to go to Christian, become a Christian, you actually have now become an apostate.
Which means
you've left your faith of Islam and become a Christian. We believe as Ahmadi Muslims there's nothing wrong with it. But
there are Muslims who believe there's a problem with that, enough to be punishable?
Unfortunately, there are a majority of Muslim sects that believe that apostasy is punishable by a death penalty, because leaving Islam is akin to treason.
So that appears to be an extreme example where any declaration that is created by 50+ countries would address and clarify. Is that clarified in the Cairo Declaration?
It's not clarified in the Cairo Declaration.
How could that be?
It still hasn't been clarified 25 years. The reason why is because there are so many variations of Sharia and the implementation.
What is Sharia?
Sharia, you know, the idea of an Islamic law, a code that basically governs. Sharia generally is sort of a broad code, but fiqh, the idea that you have rules and rule-making authority, and you're governed by those rules. In Saudi Arabia, right, there's the idea of rule-making authority, and there's codes, and those codes have certain punishments attached to them. And so one of the highest, you know, points of hypocrisy, according to some Muslims, is that you leave the faith of Islam because it's not good enough, and you've accepted essentially a competing religion, and they cite selectively cherry-pick verses of the Quran to say that's acceptable to punish because it is making a bad example for the rest of society. This happens in Pakistan, this happens to extend in Iran, in Saudi Arabia, even today, though there are actual cases of apostasy that exist, and those are punishable.
And the Cairo Declaration is silent on this.
Absolutely silent.
So what did you say, omission by...
it's admission by omission in a way, because it's not completely silent, to be fair. It says you can't pressure another to convert, but saying that we all 50+ Muslim countries say don't pressure another to convert, that's really a soft affirmation.
Now, another thing that the Cairo Declaration, some have questioned, is on women's rights. It seems like it's silent on that. How is that practiced in countries like Saudi Arabia, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, I mean, these Muslim majority countries? How does that play out?
Well, you know, a big example for all of us is Saudi Arabia. Unfortunately, a woman does not have a right to drive a car on her own. She does not have the right to be outside the house without a male companion that is there.
But isn't that just they're following Islam?
No, that is not a part of Islam. Islam does not lay restrictions on women not being able to do things of daily life. Islam gives you some basic rules, how to socially engage yourself when you're in a society, but does not restrict.
But if it's not a part of Islam, then where does it come from? Who's making these rules?
There's universal human rights, minimum safeguards, and then there's civil and political rights, there are economic, cultural, and social rights. There are different types of rights. Right. And when it comes to the issues of women, those often deal with cultural and social issues. There's a covenant. The International Covenant on Economic, Cultural, and Social Rights. It's an international covenant. Many Muslim countries haven't signed that. And civil and political rights are also not fully signed on. These are things that are permutations of their particular code. There's so many variations of how women cover or are treated in the Islamic world. In Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia, there may be more extreme views of that. Those are two examples. But you also see women thriving and practicing their faith freely in Indonesia, which is the largest Muslim country in the world. You're asking, how does this happen? It happens because those particular governments believe they can restrict things like driving a car based on their history, their cultural context, and they say that's grounded in Islam, but they want to project that on the rest of the world. I mean, the dramatic example is ISIS.
So they do say that it is grounded in Islam.
Oh, they absolutely do. I mean, ISIS is a current example. They too believe that all of their rights restrictions are grounded in Islam.
Before we go to ISIS, I mean, just these simple practices that we take for granted in Western countries like United Kingdom, like USA, where there's equal rights for women. You can leave a faith without any punishment. You can do certain things. These things just are not true in these countries.
They have an ijtihad, they have an interpretation of Islam that permits them to make these restrictions. To say it's grounded in Islam is a little bit misleading. It's not grounded in the Quran. There's no Quranic. Quran is silent on many of these questions. It's grounded in their particular interpretation of select hadith, sayings of the Prophet, select interpretations, some of the scholars and how they've interpreted it. They have some basis, but often that basis is selective.
Give me the counter narrative. Give me the example of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. What do they believe?
I think all Muslims, Ahmadis believe what all Muslims believe, which is there are three sources of guidance: Quran, the examples of the Prophet, and what he said. And if those three things don't speak to the issue, then you can't say that something is Islamic. If it contradicts something the Prophet did, I'll give you an example. Education, women's education. There's restrictions on education in some Islamic countries, but the Prophet said, "Talabul ilmi farizatun ala kulli muslimin wa muslimatin." The pursuit of knowledge is obligatory on every Muslim man and woman. That contradicts what the Prophet said and what the Prophet taught with his own daughters. Sure. So how is that consistent with Islam?
But come back to the Ahmadiyya Muslim community's view on the Cairo Declaration. Have they signed off on it?
The Cairo Declaration is a flawed document, and Ahmadis believe that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights accurately captures Islamic conception of human rights, and that is the document that all Muslim countries should have adopted, because it speaks to things like changing one's faith and having freedom of conscience and your ability to not be marred in your conscience, to leave the faith and not be punitively punished and put to jail because you're the wrong kind of Muslim, or you're a Muslim who became a Jew or a Christian. These things are not punishable. They're not punishable in the Quran. So we believe, why should they be selectively restricted in the Cairo Declaration? So no, Ahmadis don't believe that document accurately reflects human rights.
Community are you guys a small group that believes this, or how?
The Ahmadi Muslim community is the largest organized Muslim community in the world. It has one leader. It's spread in over 200 countries. It has 160 million people. So as Muslim groups go, there's a significant, and I will definitely not say a minority, a significant, growing, emerging consensus among Muslims all over the world that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 is absolutely quintessentially Islamic.
So, Amir, in present day, now the Cairo Declaration is not that old, but since then there's been Al-Qaeda, there's been ISIS, there's been these groups that claim to be representing Islam. Has the Cairo Declaration helped them achieve their mission within Islam? Or their so-called mission that they're promoting Islam?
The unfortunate reality of Cairo Declaration is that because it was not conceived in truth, it does not have the teeth that Amjad was talking about. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights basically states everything that the Cairo Declaration should have stated if the Muslims believed that. Because the Muslims of vast part of the world.
Do you think if the Muslims did not have a Cairo Declaration and accepted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights,
there would have been no ISIS, there would have
go
been
that
no,
far, say
there
that.
would have been no Al-Qaeda, there would have been no
Why?
jihad or understanding of jihad and terrorism in the Muslim countries. Because unfortunately, this is the basis which leads to everything. It is not understanding.
It's a ticking bomb.
It is a ticking bomb, unfortunately.
Well, ISIS goes beyond. ISIS is way to the conservative right of the Cairo Declaration.
Sure.
Right? ISIS, they don't accept even the Cairo Declaration, right? They have a particular view that's grounded in 7th century Islam. So they view the Cairo Declaration and they would laugh at it. They said this is even the protections that the Cairo Declaration does say are not Islamic. So yeah, they're more
So
extreme.
if more Muslims, I guess the argument is more Muslims had accepted, Muslim leadership had accepted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, following generations would have been taught in a manner which would have led them to a different path. Is that your argument?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And whereas the ISIS and Al-Qaeda and these folks have gone way beyond that.
Yeah, and I think the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the ICCPR, which is basically the manifestation of that covenant, the treaty that binds Muslim countries, and then the Economic and Social Rights Convention, I call it the International Bill of Rights. If the Islamic world had accepted the International Bill of Rights, and they still can, if they accept the International Bill of Rights, you would have groups like ISIS would not claim to represent Islam.
So make sense of this for me as an individual sitting at home. What can I do? Let's go to the Muslim group first, but non-Muslims as well. I'm sitting at home. I've just learned there's this ticking bomb that was created in 1990 that has created all this havoc, raised all this chaos because of not simply accepting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I want the country that I live in to accept the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. What can I do as an individual living in Indonesia, living in Pakistan, living in Saudi Arabia? How can I help this movement? And what is the Ahmadiyya Muslim community doing about this as well? But we'll start with you, Amr. Tell me what can I do?
So I would just correct you there. I think the ticking bomb, unfortunately, did not start back in 1990 with the Cairo Declaration. Cairo Declaration is just giving air to what had been going on in the Muslim world for the last 100 to 120 to last 100 to 100 and 120 years. I think the first thing that at a personal level one can do is at their own places of worship, at mosques, when they hear something which they think that the Islam that they've been taught and the human rights that they enjoy in the Western nations do not comply with one another, ask questions, be vocal. Ask your leaders, ask your mullahs or your priests or whoever your teacher may be. Ask questions, be vocal. And
there's an article on this somewhere as well that compares the two? Are there any documents?
There's a wonderful article by Rafi Ahmed on alislam.org that you can go to that discusses all of this in detail.
That's great. What can communities do above the individual level, like the Ahmadiyya Muslim community and others, to promote human rights in general?
The Ahmadiyya Muslim community is an example of a group that's trying to cut off the ideological foundation of a group like ISIS. You have to go at the root. And in order to replace an ideology, you have to work within the structure of Islam and say there's a counter narrative, and that those imams who support a view that is a departure from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, they should be isolated. They should be challenged publicly. There should be more debates to say that that view is a marginal view, and it should be done by Muslims who are actually reclaiming the mantle of the Quran and the sayings of the Prophet and his example. So what they can do is they can be vocal and loud, and through their pen and through their written op-eds and through public debates and forums and discussions and international forums, they should go and actually isolate this ideology.
Bring it home for me. In the United States, what is the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community USA doing in Congress and other places in order to achieve these goals?
The Ahmadiyya Muslim Community, Congress has created the Ahmadiyya Caucus, which has lawmakers, a caucus in Congress, the only Muslim caucus that exists in Congress. Wow. It's specifically designed to restore religious freedom. For example, the Muslim, Ahmadiyya Muslim youth community is going to ask Congress to support a bill that would give rights to Christians and Yazidis who are escaping persecution in Syria and Iraq. A Muslim youth group is saying we're here to help the Christians, the Ahmadiyya Muslim youth group.
So you're doing a lot of work, active work,
yeah.
and civic engagement as well. And how is it perceived? How is it received?
Well received. We have a Stop the Crisis campaign that's going on, well received in the media. Our view is you can't be silent about youth radicalization. And the youth obviously are radicalized and they create a lot of this ideology. We have to go after this problem and the financial support that ISIS is getting. So we're going very directly, and it's being well received by Americans and actually internationally as well, as here's a group that really is walking the walk on a lot of these issues.
That's great. That's great. Thank you for joining us on the show. We are at MTA International's USA studios in Silver Spring, Maryland, where we've learned many things. We've learned about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We've learned about this Cairo Declaration that was started in 1990, and what you can do at home to combat this declaration if you're a Muslim or a non-Muslim, how you can go to your elected officials in your countries to promote freedom for everyone, freedom of religion, freedom to practice any religion or no religion at all. Thank you for joining us. This is the MTA International USA Studios in Silver Spring, Maryland on Open Forum.